We've been in the Gospel of John, and it's a really, I've just been really enjoying it. John was Jesus' best friend, and his take, look at that, I couldn't pray and turn to it at the same time. Did you notice that? Boy, Pastor, you got some problems. John's take on who Jesus was, and as he described the events and the responses of people around him, I found it to be challenging to me. There's this theme of misunderstanding throughout the whole gospel, where men would come to Jesus and Jesus would say something and they would misunderstand him. Men just had this way of not getting who Jesus was. And he would say something and they would be like, I don't think that's true. Or they would say that he said something that he didn't actually say. And I picture throughout the book of John that Jesus is, in that proverbial sense, wanting to bang his head against the wall. He's dealing with some of these guys. Right? We can all get that. And we know what it is to be so frustrated with somebody who misunderstands us. And the Bible says that Jesus sympathizes with every experience, so he gets it too. So as an aside, the next time you're frustrated with somebody not getting something, wives, all right, know that Jesus gets it. He's been there. Men misunderstood him all the time. What's fascinating to me that in the Gospel of John, as much as the men misunderstood him, the women got him. They just got it. There's some profound, so you're dismissed, all the women. Go about your day. The guys will get the kids. We'll be here for a little while. Jesus has these encounters with women that are really profound, and as much as women understood Jesus, I think Jesus really, really understood women. I think that's something that we often miss, that if Jesus was, biologically male, that he didn't really understand the female experience, the female wiring, the female aura, any of that. As much as the women understood him, they had this connection to him that was so profound because it was so honest, it was so authentic. I remember back to the woman at the well where Jesus just meets this woman who has been ostracized from society. He meets her, he speaks with her, he gives grace to her. And she goes back and tells everybody about it. I think about the woman caught in adultery, brought to Jesus not by her own will and not even because Jesus sought her, but because some guys played to her victimization and they set her up. And the words that she gives to her, the words that he gives to her are so grace-filled, and none of the men got it. And they were too busy feeling condemned and guilty that they had to walk away from that moment. Jesus looks at this woman caught in her guilt, caught in her victimization, and gives grace. We're going to see a story of two more women here, and we talked about it last week, kind of the lead up to this story where Jesus meets Mary and Martha, which are two siblings that he loves dearly who are grieving for their brother Lazarus who died. And Jesus has a moment with each of them differently. He meets Martha, who is the cerebral one, the one who is angry, the one who is mad and has words for Jesus, right? She's got some really harsh things to say. Things like, if you had never been there, this wouldn't have happened. You call yourself good. You call yourself loving. If you had been where we needed you to be, this wouldn't have happened. And Jesus responded to her with the truth of who he was. I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Jesus gave her what she needed in that moment because he understood that Martha was wired with an aggressive and with a very powerful way of using words to defend herself, and a way of using words to communicate her spirituality. And that's what he gave her, which is different than what he gave Mary, Martha's sister. Mary's conclusion about Jesus and her words towards Jesus when Jesus came to her in her grieving were exactly the same as Martha's. Martha said, if you were here, this wouldn't have happened. Mary said, if you were here, this wouldn't have happened. And she says it with a tone of heartbreak. How do we know that? Because of how Jesus responded. Jesus went, and Jesus was with Mary, and Jesus didn't say anything. Instead, what did he do? He wept. He wept with her. Jesus knew what was going to happen, right? He's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He's got that. And yet he gives this grace to this woman by just being with her in that moment and feeling what she felt. Women understand Jesus because Jesus understood women. The response to this is a profound worship. And I love what John does in this kind of hinge part of the gospel. He's kind of transitioning into the latter half. And he's going to spend half of his story of Jesus talking about the last week of Jesus' life and into his resurrection. But he's got this hinge piece where, as Jesus has touched all of these lives, and especially the lives of these three, their response to him in worship is something that he puts in there. So let's read it together. John 12, verse 1. We're going to go down through verse 8 today. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary then took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to keep for himself, he used to help himself to what was put in it. And Jesus said, "Leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me." Like I said, here's the hinge point in John's gospel. He's preparing us for the end by showing us how the characters in Jesus' life were preparing themselves for the end. Lazarus' death is the hinge. Jesus raises somebody from the dead. The religious elite get very mad. You're going to read, if you were to read just a little further down, something we're going to take a look at in a couple weeks, is that not only did the religious elite want to put Jesus to death, they wanted to kill Lazarus, right? Which is kind of the definition of insanity. You know, we'll kill this guy and he'll just keep rising from the dead. If we just keep killing him, you know, it wasn't going to work, but they're angry about this. And yet John takes them in and he stops and he describes this scene. Now what's fascinating about this scene is when in the context of all of the other Gospels, it stands out because there's 4 different accounts of Jesus' life. They all have varying different stories. Some of them line up. All 4 contain this story. Right? What seems like kind of a side note. You'd almost think this happened all the time to Jesus. People gave him food and hung out with him and did these extravagant acts of worship. But all 4 of the gospel writers said this is a big deal. And I think it's because this is how you're supposed to respond to who Jesus is. We see 3 worshipers in this story. Martha, she's a doer. There's another story in the Bible where she's really making a meal for all these people, and Jesus, he's one of those guests that come to your house, and then everybody else comes, right? It's like when your teenage kid has a party, and he's only supposed to have 3 people over for pizza, and your house gets trashed by 200 other kids, right? Anybody have that happen to them? Yeah, okay. I won't ask. Don't worry. And no, there's no judgment here. Jesus was that guy. So Martha, in one occasion, is getting ready to have Jesus over, and she's got out the good china, and she set the table really nicely, and she's got a picture in her head about how it's supposed to go, and Jesus shows up, and the people keep coming and coming and coming and coming, you know, and she's gotten out the folding chairs at this point, right? And there's people sitting around the coffee table, and she's starting to flip out because nobody's helping her, right? And her sister, Mary, who should understand the stress that Martha is under, is just being with Jesus at his feet. And so she gets really mad. And she gets mad at Jesus. You brought all these people. The least you could do is tell Mary to help me out. Jesus defends Mary. It's a story in the Gospels. But it shows us kind of Martha's unique wiring, her unique build, her unique DNA. She's a doer. And in this story, we get none of that chaos. She is happy to prepare a Thanksgiving meal for Jesus and the disciples, for Lazarus and for Mary, and for whoever else was there. And I'm glad that we still have people like this, people who are willing to just serve and do and fulfill any role that needs to be taken. You know, Her worship is no less than anyone else's. It's her gifting, it's her conviction, and she's compelled to show Jesus, who just raised her beloved brother from the dead, that she loves him, and so she makes a meal for him. Then there's Lazarus, right? And Lazarus is being a proper guy, I guess, because he's just sitting there eating, right? Guy who was dead last week is now a testament to God's power, and he is literally eating and drinking to the glory of God. He's eating food because Jesus brought him back to life. And the passage tells us that everybody wanted to see this. They wanted to come and say, where's the guy who was dead? And they would poke their head in the window, and there he is, eating grapes and bread and meat with Jesus. And I love that. Lazarus is happy to be in the presence of Christ. I try to think sometimes when Lazarus was brought back from the dead, how happy he was about that, right? One minute you're in heaven, the next minute someone's coming up and saying, you got to head back. I don't know about you, but forget that. That ain't happening. I don't know, that's not in the Bible, that happened. Whatever, right? But Lazarus, 1 minute, he's in heaven with the Father. The next minute, he's in grave clothes walking out of this grave. At the same time, I think he understood that heaven was anywhere Jesus was. And so in that moment, right there, he's sitting and he's eating with his Savior, with the one who brought him back from the dead. And then there's Mary. Mary does something that is inventive, that is creative, that is personal, that is unique. She doesn't ask anybody if she can do it, she just does it. She takes what is a normal custom of their day, that is the washing of the feet of a prominent guest, and she makes it beautiful. That's what worship is. It's taking something generally normal and making it beautiful when we make it about Jesus. And so she has this idea that she's going to take what is likely an heirloom, been passed down for generations. We know that it's worth a year's wages. So whatever your year's wages, that's what this perfume cost. She breaks it open, she pours all of it onto Jesus' feet, and she wipes his hair with it, or wipes his feet with her hair. Thank you. It's profound, and it's beautiful, and it's unique. It does not steal Lazarus' worship or Martha's worship, but it is something profound that I think we can gather some ideas from. First of all, what I notice is that it's an act of love. Right? It's an act of love and devotion. It's not an act of obligation or earning favor. This is not something she's going to take to heaven, and when he gets to heaven and someone says, why should you be here? Well, I took my $60,000 perfume and I broke it over Jesus' feet. That's not why she's doing it. She's doing this out of response. Why did Mary do this? Because she loved him. Why did she love him so much? Well, because she knew how much he loved her. And we don't know a ton about Mary, but we have been given some glimpses. In another account of this story, her name isn't used, but the author describes her as this woman who came to Jesus and poured this ointment on her feet, and she was a sinner. That's one of the descriptions. And you see, someone who is a former sinner and has been touched by Jesus does these kind of beautiful, provocative, inventive, and grand gestures towards Christ. We know that she was a sinner. We know that his love was given to her in that way. We know that she was always at his feet, that was her favorite place to be. And she was just happy to be there, to listen, to gaze at him, and to know him. And you know somebody and you know their love when you're close to them. We know that she was a recipient of his empathy. We knew that Jesus had come to her, that he had sought her out, like Jesus does for all of us, to show us that he understands us. She was a witness of his love in action, which was his love that had no limit, and it brought back her brother from the dead. Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead for any number of different reasons, but I think one of the most profound was because he loved Mary. And he loved Martha. And he wanted them to know his power over life and death. And she knew what it meant to be loved by God, and that's why she loved him so much. And so she does this difficult to define thing. She does an act of worship that brings God glory. You ever hear people kind of banty about that language? We need to give God glory. Anything we do, we want to do it to give God glory. Anybody know what that actually means? Right? We kind of do, but we don't really. You know, giving glory to God is one of those difficult to kind of nail down things, but I like to say that it's doing something so loving and lovely, regardless of cost or consequence, that it happens when we're compelled to respond to him in a way that is so concentrated on who he is, and it's so undeniable to other people. We give God glory, and it happens when we love him so much that we give over of ourselves completely so that everybody would know his goodness. It's doing these type of acts of worship. And that was not common in Jesus' day. In the temple, worship and giving God glory was not beautiful. It was not fragrant. It was not grand. It was not expensive. It was cheap. It was violent. It was bloody. If you were to go to the temple and say, okay, I need to go give God glory, first of all, you're going out of obligation. You've probably got a sheep or some sort of livestock with you. Maybe if you've traveled from out of town, you're picking something up there, so you're buying a dove and you're taking it in so that that dove or that sheep or that lamb or that goat or whatever it is could lose its life. And when you get to the temple, you know, it smells bad. It's not a kind of fragrant place. It's nobody's garden. And there's the evidence of death all around. There's blood in the altar. There's blood on the priests. There's pilgrims who are walking slowly and calmly and reverently maybe, but also with this sense, I just want to get this done and get out of here. That's what worship was like in the temple in Jesus' day, and what Mary shows us is kind of completely the opposite. It's expensive, and it's fragrant, and it's beautiful, and it gives Jesus glory. That's what all worship should be. When we look at this, and we look at this story, there's 3 words, I think, that describe her, that we can maybe wrap our heads around, that we can maybe take from Mary. There's 3 moments in worship, because worship really is a time. There's the preparation to worship, there's the act of worship itself, and then there's leaving worship. And I want us just to maybe engage Mary on a deeper level, just to consider those things. What was she feeling? What's the best word to describe her as she prepared for worship? Well, I think the best way to describe her worship was that she was compelled. There's no obligation around this. No one said she had to do this. In fact, Judas is already mad about it, right? But she's compelled. There's something in her that has to do this. She has to go about doing this thing. She might be nervous, but she is not obligated. And obligatory worship is not worship at all. And there really is no hesitation. Now, if we were to think of all the reasons why she shouldn't do it, we could come up with a few of those, right? Right? What she's doing is about to be expensive. It's about to cost a lot of people a lot of things. You know, Mary's probably not happy that she chose this use of the heirloom, right? That there was this waste, we know, is Judas's problem. But she was compelled. She had no other way to do it. Paul writes, he says, the love of Christ compels us. You see, obligatory worship is not worship at all. Normalized worship is not worship at all, because there's no push from inside of us. It's not something that we're doing because we can't not do it. Mary was compelled in this moment. None of these things seem to bother her. There is no hesitation. All the reasons why not to do it, that other people are watching, that the gift was expensive, are not good enough for her to stop her action, and she has to do it. What she does here is in response to someone who is called beloved. That was her identity. See, this wasn't an action of a Jew. This was the identity of Christ's beloved. This is what you do when you're beloved of Jesus. And she was compelled. She just had to do it. And so in her preparation, all of those thoughts as to why, all of the reasons why not to do it are dismissed. They're put aside because she just has to. The love of Christ compelled her, and the love of Christ is what compels us. And if we are feeling obligatory in our worship, or worship is becoming normalized, or it's just routine or rote, maybe it's because our identity is not firmly grounded and cherished in the idea that we are His beloved. If we got to force ourselves to get up, if we got to force ourselves to give, if we've got to force ourselves to serve, maybe we're not so fully comprehending the degree of God's love for us. Mary, that's not her. She's compelled. She has to do this. How do you think she felt in the act of worship? I'm going to use a word to describe it. I think she felt free. I think she felt totally liberated. She was in a public place, but there was a shameless freedom for her to share her love with Jesus in the presence of other people, including her family and some strange men. And she's free because she's shameless. How do we know she's shameless? She lets down her hair. And that day, women didn't do that. They only did that for their husbands. They only did that for the one who had committed to them their lives. The one who with vows made them safe, made them secure. The one who promised love and intimacy, the very things that Jesus had done for her. She lets down her hair. She puts her hair down. Paul says that a woman's hair is her glory, which is a profoundly thing to meditate on, women. I mean, beauty is meant to be what you're able to use to give God glory. Mary does this because she feels no shame. How can she feel no shame? Because of Jesus. We know that the Bible says that any shame that we feel from our past, any victimization we have, any guilt, any scorn, anything that causes us to withdraw or hide ourselves, to cover up our true identity. Those moments where we just want to put our hair in front of our face and hide from the world. Jesus takes away all of those reasons. All of them. There's no reason to feel shame in the presence of Christ. And so in her act, she's totally free. I was at church last week in Sycamus. Sorrento, Sycamus. I don't even know where I'm going these days. I was in Sycamus, and Dustin is one of our worship leaders out there, and he's got a beautiful and gentle spirit, and he's leading the people in worship, and you can just hear people singing. And I was standing kind of in the second row, and someone's singing behind me, and I think it's like a junior youth kid, 10, 12 years old, little girl, singing out to the glory of God, totally off key. It was awful. I can't even sing with this because this is like, right? She just loved Jesus so much. She didn't care. She wasn't reserved. She wasn't hesitant. She was going to give it all up for him. I hope she carries that on through the rest of her life. Because when we get older, we get a little more reserved. We get a little more worried about what other people are thinking about us. We get a little more hesitant to make grand gestures for fear of what somebody else might be thinking right now. Mary feels none of that. We know that because she let down her hair. She let her beauty be seen by all, and she took her beauty and she gave it to Jesus. She took her glory and she gave it to Jesus. There was no guilt, there was no shame, there was no worry. It was beautiful because she felt safe in that moment to share her uniqueness. Finally, how do you think Mary felt when her worship was complete? I'm going to choose the word beautiful. I'm going to choose that word, beautiful. And she gets this moment with Jesus where he smells really good and she gave it to him, and she, in the aura of his glory, finds beauty in herself. The image of God's intention in creation was fulfilled in this worshipful act. And we were created in the image of God to reflect back to God, him, to reflect back to God beauty. In a woman's case, this is This is why Eve was made, to reflect back to God this beauty. And she had done this, and I think she felt that. I think she felt beauty in its most pure sense. We contrast that with the lack of feeling of beauty that many women these days feel, starting at a very young age, where their beauty is not something that is natural to them, where this feeling of being completely innocent and beautiful and holy and pure is foreign. And in fact, beauty is more of a scary thing. And women have been abused because of their beauty. They've been manipulated because of their beauty. Their beauty has been stolen from them. They've been victimized from it. And it's the greatest tragedy of Western society, of all society. But it's particularly something here. And so I think a lot of women are, first of all, the feeling and the belief that they're beautiful is a foreign feeling. I only feel beautiful when somebody's in the act of taking my beauty away from me. I guess I must have had some if they had to take it. That's a shame. And Mary does this act, and it just fills the room with this sense of wow. And they look at her and they look at Jesus and they see this love and devotion that they have for one another in a non-sexual, but in a very intimate and profoundly spiritual way. Everyone is blessed by it. They're seeing the act, her gift itself, but also her willingness to engage the gift, not just give the gift, as an act of outright love and devotion. And I bet she felt beautiful as a result of that. That's what redemption does. That's what redemption does. When Jesus removes our stain of sin, when he removes the guilt, when he removes our victimization, when he takes away the shame and liberates us to new life, it should make you feel beautiful. It should make you feel whole. It should make you feel complete. It should make you feel pure. That's what redemption does. It made her feel, I think maybe, for one of the only times, the first times in her life, real. Real. Here we see this beautiful act of worship, and it is wonderful, and it begins with listening and believing and receiving God's truth about his love and grace for you. One of the problems is that there's all these other voices telling us who we are. There's all these other voices saying you need to be this, or you need to act like this, or you need to change this. Especially when it comes to our identity, especially when it comes to our past, especially when it comes to how we view ourselves. There's all these voices that are telling us how we should feel, what we're supposed to be. And I know a lot of people, and especially women, who just want someone to tell them what to be. And they get to miss out on this kind of experience with Christ because of it. I want to take a second and maybe just encourage you women to consider the voices and the messages in your life. What I hope is that you've got somebody in your life, whether it's a husband or a parent or even a child, who can tell you the truth about how God sees you. Because you know who's not going to do it? Facebook isn't going to do it. You know, Facebook, which is a constant source of message all the time, will only bring out your insecurities. What Facebook will tell you is that you're too fat, you're too thin, you're too lazy, you're too impatient, you're too out of touch. Maybe this week you're just too dry. Right? If you don't dump water over your head, you're not a generous person. All of these different messages that you just get on there and you just feel like I was going to say a different word. You just don't feel good about yourself. And so those messages aren't the truth. Don't listen to your tribe. You know what I mean by tribe? So this group of people that we try to identify this would be any of the blank that you put before mom. Words like hockey mom, or homeschool mom, or working mom, or stay-at-home mom, or organic mom. Any of those words that you use to describe yourself as identifying with the tribe. What it's going to do is it's going to bring out your pride while it steals your energy. They will tell you to sacrifice your time and space and joy and calling in order to worship what truly is their idol. It will try to get you to shape your identity around best practices, which are going to require great sacrifice. I read the story of a woman in People magazine who was a vegan blogger, right? Those are two words put together that were never mentioned 10 years ago. Vegan blogger. A vegan is someone who only eats raw food and doesn't eat anything that has anything to do with animals. And a blogger is somebody who writes about that thing. And this woman was a vegan blogger. And she had a great following around the world. What she began to see, though, was a tendency to sacrifice her own body for other people's approval. That as she wrote about her sacrifice to herself, other people thought she was great. Other people were amazed by her wisdom and by her gift and by her writing. She termed a new term, which I think we're going to hear a lot more of, called orthorexia, which is the compulsion towards righteous eating. That all she thought about all day, every day, was the next meal and how she was going to do it right. She blogged about how when her body started to shut down and do strange things, that she went out and bought a piece of fish, a piece of salmon, she cooked it, and she ate it, and her body bounced back. She wrote about that and then received death threats from her tribe. Why? Because the tribes want you to worship their thing. And the tribes want you to fit in with them. Hockey's good, homeschool's good, organic is good, being healthy is good. All of those things are good, and we give them to Jesus. We don't do them instead of Jesus. They are not our identity. Your tribe is not your identity. You need to discern also the messages of your family, your kids, your husbands, your mothers. They're only going to mirror your imperfections, right? If your identity is wrapped around your 2-year-old being a good 2-year-old, they're going to be unhappy or you're going to be unhappy. True? Amen. Hey, we got an amen. It took us 40 minutes. It's all right. I got to wrap this up. That's 2 strikes, my friend. That's 2. You're lucky this thing's shutting down, or else there would be a public scene. Your kids are only going to mirror your imperfections. They're only going to give you messages that aren't true either. Your husbands too. What we want is we want our kids to receive so much love from Jesus that they can't help but give that love that you give them from Jesus back to everybody. Husbands, your job is to be so moved by Jesus that you just give that to your wife. She knows what unconditional love is from Jesus through you. You can't listen to these messages from your family, your tribe, from social media. You can't do it from your past because those voices get loud and you'll start to hesitate in your worship. Why? There's always a cynic. There's always a cynic. That was Jesus, the Judas's thing here. Judas gets up and he gets all high and mighty and he's like, why wasn't this given to the poor? Right? There's always that guy. There's always that cheap guy who really isn't doing this for kingdom reasons. We look and we say, well, that's a very righteous thing to say. John tells us, don't believe in him. Right? Because he was all about himself. You see, Judas was the guy who was posting all of his good deeds on Facebook. Judas was the guy who was leading the tribes to go out to the poor. He was also the guy who was stealing from Jesus' glory. He was also the guy whose heart was so far from God that he feels the need in his guilt to condemn someone's act of worship. Judas is that guy, and there's always going to be that guy. But that guy's problem is that guy's heart. Has nothing to do with Mary and has nothing to do with Jesus. Judas is using sincerity to distract himself and everybody else from his own guilt. What's he guilty of? He's guilty of stealing Christ's glory. He's guilty of loving money more than he loves Jesus. He's guilty of taking everybody thinking he's a good guy and making Mary into the bad guy. Judas is guilty of not caring for the poor, but using that virtue to justify his sin. Judas is guilty of using sincerity to distract other people from his heart's true intention. Judas is guilty, and he's being led away from Jesus to betrayal, not to repentance. And Judas proclaims this outward sincerity that justifies a self-serving discipleship in that he's using spiritual words to cover up his own sinful heart. And he does that by condemning her. And you know what would never happen for Judas? He would never worship. We know that. We know that he was with Jesus, and over the next couple of days he would be with Jesus. He would smell the smell on Jesus up until the Last Supper, because that's how long it would be around. And he would refuse to worship. What he would do was he would die in disgrace. See, we can't worship if we have a self-centered spirituality. We got to be on guard against justifying our own sincerity. Guarding our own sincerity when the opportunity to worship, we say things like, I can't afford to do it. I'm too tired to serve. I'm too busy to sit at his feet. I'm too introverted to share our stories. The question has to be why, because all of those sound like very sincere things, and they may just be, but there is an opportunity, there is a chance that when we're so moved and compelled by the love of Jesus to put all those things aside, to take a minute and sit at his feet, to give in a grand way, to serve out of devotion. For us, we've got to ask ourselves why. Mary, this wasn't about her gift, this was about her heart. For Judas, he focused the attention on the gift in order to minimize the degree of love that she had, but it didn't matter because she was giving all of it to himself. Jesus sees through it all and calls out the cynicism. His words humiliate Jesus, which is what happens when the guilty cynic is in the presence of true worship. Jesus is going to call it out. There are times in our lives where we're going to be in worship and we've been living in a self-serving way. We know we're guilty of taking spiritual things and making them about ourselves. We know we're doing it just to make ourselves feel good, to do our duty, to say, I've done this thing today and I'm okay and God's okay with me. And it's in those moments that we need to hear the words of Jesus, stop it. Stop being guilty and acting out of guilt. What she has done is she has no guilt because she gets my death. Hey, the beauty of Christ is that it continues to change lives. I read this week of the contrast between the Judases and the Mary. The beauty of Christ and his gospel continues to captivate millions of believers all over the world and drive them to passionate worship, while it simultaneously disgusts, angers, and bores millions of others. I don't know about you, but I know which side of that I want to be on, but also which side of that I just drift to. When there's normalcy, when there's complacency. I may not be an unbeliever, but I'm definitely bored in worship, bored in my awe of the things of God, bored of grace, and bored of the gospel. We talk about the gospel here every Sunday. Every Sunday we talk about the gospel. And I wonder sometimes if everyone's just going to get tired of it. And I wonder sometimes if I wonder that because I'm tired of it. I wonder sometimes if it's an okay thing to center the whole church around. And the answer is yes, because it's endlessly rich. If we're not moved by it, if we're not compelled by it, if we're not changed by it, and we're just doing this for the sake of doing it, and whatever the reason is, but it's devoid of love and it's devoid of devotion, then maybe we're on a slippery slope away from the gospel. What Mary did prepared Jesus for his burial. He says that she makes him beautiful for the day when all of the ugliness, when all of the violence, when all of the blood would be all that was known about him. See, the fragrance that she gave him, the beauty that she gave him on that day of worship was going to last until the day he died. They would look at him and they would smell him, and the two things wouldn't measure up because they could still pick up that fragrance. That's how potent her act of worship was. And she would never leave his feet. When it got hard, when it got difficult, when her life was in danger, she would never leave his feet. She would sit at the foot of the cross, knowing the profound love that he had that led him there. And when we come into worship, whatever kind of worship it is, if it's singing songs, if it's giving gifts, if it's serving in ministry, if it's just being moved and blown away by something, we have got to see the love of God that he had for us in giving us Jesus. And Jesus' love and devotion for us and for the Father that surrendered his life for us. It is not normal. That's not normal. And our worship isn't normal. And when we're compelled by this, this actually matters. This gets a hold of our heart. So which one are we going to be? Are we going to be those who are responsive in our worship as we find ourselves as one of his beloved? Are we going to be ready when the time is right? Will it come from being so moved by love and grace and mercy and peace and security that we just have to give of this gift? When we're singing songs, we can either be singing songs or we can be singing songs to the glory of God. You know what the difference is? It's right in here. It's right here. It doesn't maybe look different. You don't have to raise your hands. You don't have to fall on your knees. You don't have to dance around. You don't have to cry and weep. But if your heart is so full of the love of Jesus and you're singing those songs to his glory, that's all that it needs to be. When we give of our gift and we say of our tithe, this isn't all I can give. I'm just going to give everything over to him. And I'm going to give generously even though it doesn't make sense. And rather than listen to the voices in our own head or the voices of condemnation that either it's not good enough or it is too much, that we reject those things because we're so free in that moment to give of that gift. And that we walk out of whatever opportunity we just had to worship, whether it be in nature or with other people or around our dinner table or whatever, we walk out of it feeling redeemed, in that we feel whole and complete and beautiful and real. That's what we want to be. That's what we want to go for. Jesus gave all of himself for us, and the only response is to give it back to him. And here's the thing, in the Christian heart, it is natural. We want to do it. We've just got to do it. Let's pray.